Okay, this is the second time I've started this. I got several minutes into this a minute ago and it just stopped. So rather than try to patch two of them together, I'm starting over. Our first topic in History 1302. By the way, the first unit is America in the Gilded Age. And that's a loosely defined term referring to America between, say, the end of the Civil War and the end of the centuries, the 1870s and 80s. Where did it come from? What does it mean? Something is gilded if it's coated with or decorated with gold. That was a popular, fashionable thing at the time. But Mark Twain, of all people, in 1873 published a novel entitled The Gilded Age, where he and a co author, it's the only time he ever had one of those, they satirized the somewhat excessive lifestyles of the very wealthy people at that time. Got a whole new class of new rich people, and they're seriously rich coming out of the Civil War. So the Gilded Age, we'll be looking at the defeat of the Plains Indians, now this one, and the settlement of the interior West. Then we'll move on to a more wide-ranging thing where we'll be talking about some cultural values like um, materialism. How do we know people are more materialistic after the Civil War than before? We can guess about that. And then technological change. The 19th century is a big breakout there. Then on to economic change affected by technological change, the working class, and finally immigration and urban growth. And that will do it for this unit. So the immediate topic, the defeat of the Plains Indians. Okay, the Civil War ended in 1865. At that time, and you can tell, guessing in the dark here, it is thought that the number of Native Americans in the Great Plains area, that's from the like Texas Panhandle, New Mexico, Oklahoma, all the way up to Canada, which lay between where the trees played out west of the Mississippi River and where the Rocky Mountains started. Of course, that the plains and the mountains together are the so-called interior West, the last area to be settled, and the Indians who lived there would be the last to be subdued. One of their tribes, the Comanches, held out longer than any other tribe. We'll see about that. Okay, there's no such tribe as the Plains tribe. That's a shorthand term for the various tribes who inhabited the Great Plains. Some of the names might be familiar: the Sioux, the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Ute, Arapaho, and so on. Weird thing, where some of these tribal names came from is you have kind of a first contact between members of an Indian tribe and Europeans or their American descendants. And so the question comes out once they can talk to each other, who are you guys? And the Indians will reply, what they hear coming out of their own mouths would be, we're the real people, or we're the genuine human beings. What it sounds like to European ears is Arapaho or Wichita or Kiowa. So that's not all of them. It's good many of them were like that. Okay, what social characteristics do the various Plains tribes have in common? For one thing, their lifestyle was communal rather than individualistic. We live in more of an individualistic culture where it's kind of every man for himself. You know, you grow up in a nuclear family, and the time comes you go out on your own. For the Plains tribes, it's an extended family. A nuclear family is mom and pop and the kids. It doesn't mean you live too close to Glen Rose and glow in the dark. Um, the extended family is mom and pop and the kids and the uncles and aunts, nieces, nephews, cousins, maybe even grandparents. They didn't necessarily live that long. It was an extended family. Everything is in common. All decisions are made based on the welfare of the whole group, not particular individuals. So you grow up, if you're in that situation, you grow up learning that. It's a difficult, sometimes desperate life because survival itself is a day-to-day struggle. Speaking of which, they were nomads. You know what that means? That word means they travel around a lot, following game animals. By a lot, I mean it could be 3 or 4 times a year on a fairly regular cycle. They could move quickly. Their dwellings, sometimes called teepees, are just long poles tied together at the top with buffalo hides strung around them. You can take that down, and if you got horses, you have gizmo called a travois. It just drags along the ground behind the horse, but they can move fairly quickly. They follow game animals. They uh, consume edible plants of various kinds. So they're communal. They're nomadic. They are warlike. They fight each other. Not necessarily what you think. It's not necessarily desperate do or die, uh, battle of the death sort of thing, although people could and did get killed and injured in warfare. But it was really almost had an aspect of a game about it in a way. You could score points or add a feather to your war bonnet merely by managing to touch an enemy in combat. And they'd carry a stick for that purpose. And French fur trappers that were the first to visit them among Europeans referred to it as a coup stick. That's the French word COUP. Coup means touch or stroke. So it seems a little odd. And as far as they're having their ancestral lands where they'd lived for millennia, not really. They had generally loosely defined turf areas they would defend, but they moved around quite a bit and they pushed each other around a bit. Um, they do not have, this goes with being communal, I think, they don't really have a well defined concept of private property. Land, particularly, wasn't something you could make a permanent claim on. It's just there, it's for everybody. And since they're not farmers, they really don't need the concept of land as private property. But you have to factor that in. Their the basis of their lifestyle, the thing that kept them up and enabled them to continue the way they were living, was the buffalo. Technically, the North American bison. Um, at that time, the most numerous species of large animal in the world. A bison can be 3 or 4 times the size of a dairy cow, unless I'm mistaken. They run in very large herds, and you can imagine if you're just out there in your two little moccasins and your bow and arrow, how are you going to bring one of those things down? How many arrows do you have to pump into its hide to slow it down? Um, so before they got horses, they didn't eat buffalo all that much. Maybe get out there and work in teams and split one off from the herd and just keep it running for 24, 36 hours till it drops from exhaustion. It's hardly even worth the trouble. Hitting the lottery would be finding some buffalo grazing near a cliff and stampede them and hope they stampede over the cliff instead of over you. It doesn't make that much difference to the buffalo. And the way we know this is deposits piles of buffalo bones at the bottoms of cliffs. So this is wasteful. You're not going to use anywhere near as many buffalo as perish in the fall. But there's plenty. It's estimated there's like 12 to 15 million buffalo on the plains immediately after the Civil War. So the buffalo to the Plains Indian is a kind of walking Walmart. You could eat the meat, of course, till it just got too spoiled. They don't have deep freezes. You could make clothing and shelter out of the hides. You could make bowstrings and tie things together with the sinews. You could make tools out of the bones, glue out of the hooves. I don't know if they've figured that out yet, but it could be done. And at a pinch, you could burn the dried buffalo droppings as fuel. Okay, so it provided nearly everything they wanted, and the buffalo are necessary to the Plains Indians' way of life. Eventually, from the 1500s on, the horse would come to play a close second. The horse transforms the lifestyle of the Plains Indians, gives them much greater mobility. They're much deadlier in fighting, and what was I going to say about that? Well, it's easier to bring down the buffalo from horseback. This thing keeps rocking around. Sorry about that. I've got this on a lap desk on my lap in a very comfortable swivel rocker in the corner by the windows in my daughter's old room. She hasn't been here in a while. She comes, but she's 33 now and is expecting her fourth grandchild. Okay, little girl already got a name, Lydia Rose Warren. I'll show you a picture within a month when she gets here. Um, so the horse is very important. They kept dogs, sometimes for companionship and sometimes for eating. They ate them. So that was the basis of their lifestyle. Their concepts about family structure, I've already told you. Now, authority structures. They, and I think most Native Americans in general, did not have a real concept of authority, somebody being in charge or being under authority. That's more likely to happen in the eastern woodlands and goes to its greatest extent in the Pacific Northwest. But the Indians consider themselves to be free. Now, as I said in one of these roving bands, did I do that a while ago or this time? A tribe would be several thousand people, but you can't feed several thousand people if you're a nomad for more than a few days. So you'd find these roving bands roaming across the countryside, and the largest number of Indians you're liable to find at any one place in time, if it were a town today, it would struggle to keep a convenience store open. 3 or 4, maybe 500 people, related families. Okay. Within that, decisions will be reached by consensus of the tribal elders. These are the senior men. Now, outsiders would use an English word denote the man in charge as a chief. And Indians speak English now, so they use that term also, but they didn't then. Now, this leads to a kind of misunderstanding because when Indian leaders meet with representatives of the U.S. government in the 19th century, the U.S. government representatives assume that a chief is like a king who inherited his authority and his word is law. Not so. You became a chief not through um, uh, a pedigree or anything like that. You became a chief just by the simple fact that natural leadership will emerge. If you display wisdom in peace and bravery in battle, there you are. You seem to be more trusted than others. You have the capability of sizing up a situation and selling the others on a logical, rational course of action. It's not the idea. They didn't have the idea that anybody had to do anything anybody else said. I'll try to keep this still before you get seasick. I might. Um, so you have that. Okay. We're going to move on to what led to their defeat, and I'm going to not be able to finish it on this segment. I'll finish it on the next one. So we're going to be ready for defeat of the Plains Indians. Uh, it'll be called 1301 1 or Unit 1A B.